If you teach kids somewhere between kindergarten and third grade, there's a good chance you've been handed a Dolch list, a Fry list, or both, and to make sure your students know them, or at least parts of them. But there are some real problems with how those lists are being used. And understanding those problems can change how you approach high-frequency word instruction in a way that helps students learn to read. If you're new here, my name is Anna Geiger. I'm the author of Reach All Readers, host of the Reach All Readers podcast, and creator of the Reach All Readers Plus membership. And my goal is to help you bridge the gap between what we know from research and what you do in the classroom every day. Let's start with what the term sight words actually means. The term sight word gets used in a lot of different ways, and that confusion is part of the problem. A word becomes a sight word when you can read it automatically without needing to sound it out or guess at it. You, as a literate adult, have 30,000 to 70,000 sight words. But that's not typically the way we think of sight words in the teaching sense. Typically, for teachers, sight word has meant a word that is irregular that students have to learn to memorize as a picture, as a whole, because they can't sound it out. But even with words that we might consider irregular, we need to orthographically map them. Orthographic mapping is a mental process by which we connect the sounds with the letters with the meaning. So another way to say that is we connect the phonemes, the sounds, to the graphemes, the letter or letters that spell those sounds. And we store them in our long-term memory, so we recognize the word instantly. If I were going to show you some words, maybe words on a sign, and I would say, don't read it, whatever you do, don't read it. If you looked at it, you couldn't help yourself. You'd read it automatically, and that's because you've orthographically mapped those words. We have to pull out our phonics skills when we're presented with a longer word we've never seen before, maybe a medical term or an unfamiliar last name. But most of the time, you recognize words automatically because they're mapped in your brain. That's what we want to do for our students. What we're really trying to do is turn high-frequency words into sight words. That said, the word sight words is still very popular, and so we still hear it and sometimes use it, but we just need to be clear that when we're talking about sight words, we're probably talking about high-frequency words. Words that students encounter often and need lots of practice with. Let's talk about who created the Dolch and Fry sight word lists. Edward Dolch published his list in 1936. To compile it, he drew from three sources: a 1928 vocabulary study of words children knew in spoken language before entering first grade, a 1926 list of words recommended for teaching in kindergarten through second grade, and a 1930 study of words appearing frequently in primers and first reader. Of the 220 words on his list, 193 appeared in all three sources. And I got this information from a document by Readsters. I'll be sure to link to that below this video. So Dolch was a proponent of the look-say approach to reading. We might think of that as whole language. He believed children should be able to recognize words by their shape, and he staunchly advocated teaching only sight words in first grade, waiting until second grade to introduce phonics at all, if desired. He often used the word guess when talking about how to teach beginning readers. That in itself should give us a lot of concern. Fry, who was also named Edward, first published his instant word list in 1957 and revised it in 1980. So the full list includes 1,000 words, and it's broken apart into chunks. Teachers might encounter it as Fry's first 100, Fry's 300, Fry's 600. Many schools use the Fry's 300 as their source for high-frequency words to teach. Fry noted that the first 10 words on his list make up about 25% of all words in print, and the first 300 words make up about 65%. His list was compiled from the American Heritage Word Frequency Book, actually a resource based on texts used in grades 3 through 9, interestingly, not K to second grade, which is when we typically see these lists being used. Just like Edward Dolch, Edward Fry focused on teaching kids to memorize words instead of learning to sound them out. That was the primary method he recommended for teaching reading. Both were working from an instructional philosophy, the look-say method, which has a lot in common with whole language, that is not backed by research. So I think those are really important things to keep in mind when we're using these lists to drive instruction. It's also important to remember that the grade level groupings within the Dolch list don't make any sense at all. You'll look at the Dolch list organized by grade level and you'll see words like little, yellow, away, and funny on the pre-primer list, words given to 4 and 5-year-olds to memorize, and then look at some of the words on the third grade list. If, got, 6, 10, cut, hot. Those are simple CVC words, 3 sounds, fully phonetically regular. According to Linda Farrell and Michael Hunter of Readsters, there's no primary resource that they could find that tells us that Dolch actually sorted his words by grade level. And it's possible that later on, someone took them and organized them according to how much we would see them in different grade level texts. So words like yellow maybe appeared in pre-primer books, and words like if, which is on the third grade list, shows up more frequently in third grade texts. But the origin of the grade level organization isn't documented. I think we can just together agree that it's pretty silly. Because what we're left with is a grade level structure that makes no sense for phonics instruction. Why would we ask younger students to memorize these longer multisyllable words like yellow while holding simple decodable words until third grade? It really makes no sense at all. I think the bigger problem, though, is what happens in classrooms. When a school hands a kindergarten teacher a mandate to get students reading 100 sight words by the end of the year, often what happens is they're just taught to memorize them as wholes. That turns into word walls, flashcards, drill, without actually teaching kids how those words work, the structure of the words, how the sounds match up to the letters. We're trying to drill students into holding as many word shapes in their mind as possible. The brain can only store so many pictures, so it's not surprising that when kids in kindergarten are memorizing from a big list, they start forgetting the earlier words by the time they get to the end. So what should we do instead? It makes sense to initially teach a handful of words that show up constantly in early reading for kids to memorize. It's really okay to do a little bit of that. Readsters actually recommends about 10 words, and I'll put those up on the screen here. But we should not rely on memorization as the primary method for teaching high-frequency words. And we definitely should not be drilling lists of sight words organized by grade level rather than by phonics skill. We want to be incorporating these words into our phonics instruction as much as possible, and then when necessary, give those words extra attention, possibly by studying the parts of the word that are spelled in a way we might not expect. I think it makes sense to teach the words according to phonics patterns whenever possible, with the understanding that sometimes we need a word a little bit sooner. So for example, with the word see, S-E-E, we've got that phonics pattern E-E at the end. A lot of programs don't teach vowel teams until first grade, but C is a word we would want our kindergartners to know. So we could teach it as a heart word, and I'll have a video coming about that eventually, or we can just teach our students that E-E spells E, and just tell them that quickly and teach that from the beginning, just for that word. Here are some examples of CVC and VC words from the sight word lists. Can, not, big, and red are from the pre-primer list. On, at, am, get, did, and ran are from the primer list. The first grade list has had, him, second grade, us, and sit, and third grade, if, got, 6, 10, cut, hot. Again, this kind of makes me crazy. Of course, those words don't belong in all those different grade level lists. We should teach them all when we teach CVC words, and we don't need to give all of these lots of special attention as long as we're teaching kids to decode CVC words. Now back to those words that are tricky or irregular, words that don't fully match up according to what we might expect because of how they are pronounced. This is a real issue that we need to think about. There's a lot more to this though, and one is that not every word in English matches up perfectly phonetically. In fact, most don't, because we know that English is a morphophonemic language. It's actually normal, it's regular for words to not match up perfectly according to their sounds. So one example I like to give is the word bugs. That's a kindergarten word, but the S is spelling Z. Another example would be the word kicked. The ED is pronounced T, even though in other words it's pronounced ed or D. I address this very topic, how to tackle words we might consider irregular, in my 5-day challenge called Transform Your High-Frequency Word Instruction. Join us to take a closer look at how to approach high-frequency word instruction in a way that makes sense for all of your students and helps them master those words and not simply memorize and forget them. The link to join the 5-day challenge is in the description below. I hope to see you there. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.